Our next panel is on the topic of renewable energy, and we'll introduce our panelists in a second, but the moderator is going to be Professor Safak Yucel, my colleague, perhaps the easiest introduction for me to make, because it's somebody who I not only collaborate on research, but also in teaching with. He is an associate professor of operations management here at the McDonough School of Business, quite integral to everything that the initiative does as well, and also a world expert on the business of sustainable energy and technology. I know many of you have taken his class as well, but with that, I'll thank him for moderating this panel and turn it over to him. Safak.
Thanks a lot, Vishal. So thank you all for coming. As Vishal said, renewable energy is near and dear to my heart, my career as well. I've been researching renewable energy for the past decade or so, teaching courses associated with it as well, and it's one of the central pillars of our Business of Sustainability initiative. In fact, one of the very first events that we organized as the initiative was a conversation with Sargon Daniel, who is one of our proud alumni and also has been working on renewable energy. And today, we're going to have a continuation of that conversation with three excellent panelists that I'm really excited to introduce to yourselves. So first, we have Emily Easley joining us. Emily had a long tenure at the Solar Energy Industry Association as well as Smart Electric Power Alliance, and she's now the CEO of NOVUS Energy Advisors, and Emily will provide us with great insights on renewable energy. Next, we have Sarah. Sarah's last name is a bit tough for me to pronounce, so I'm going to try it nevertheless. Mihalecz. Very good. So Sarah has worked on sustainability-related issues throughout her career, started as a consultant for Deloitte, then she had the Tata's sustainability efforts, and she's been with Clean Energy Buyers Association for the last 5 years or so, so she will have a unique perspective on the demand side for renewable energy for us. And last but not least, we have Nicole Steele. Nicole has worked across different roles in public service, ranging from Loudoun County to the largest nonprofit solar installer in the country to President Biden's campaigns. So she has immense experience on public service, and she's most recently affiliated with the US Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency, leading interesting initiatives at both of these great institutions, providing us with a unique perspective on the policy side of renewable energy that we're really excited to hear about as well. So please join me in welcoming our panelists to Georgetown. So thank you. Thank you for coming. All right, so without further ado, let me get started by first focusing on the demand side. And one of the central themes today has been this business case for sustainability, right? And that's the core tenet of our Business of Sustainability initiative. Obviously, there is a moral case for sustainability. There's an altruistic reason for sustainability as well, but we're talking about the business case. And with that, I would like to focus on the demand side first. And why are these companies, and many of these, are sourcing renewable electricity, sourcing renewable energy? Why are they using renewable energy procurement as a sustainability strategy? So I would like to focus on this why part first, and maybe I can go to Sarah first and get comments from Emily and Nicole as well.
Certainly. Well, thank you, and it's really great to be here on this beautiful campus. So I work for the Clean Energy Buyers Association. We exist because there is demand. So that's, first a signal that there's an organization that exists to support energy buyers who are in this voluntary space, sending a demand signal and actively transacting in the market. So it's really encouraging. We're about officially a 10-year-old organization, and we're started when a bunch of clean energy buyers got into a room together and said, there's no organization representing us. There's a lot of great associations out there and organizations that support the technology side, such as SIA, where Emily used to work. And what they wanted to see was a group for the buyer. So now we have about 400 organizations who are members of our association, and that work is mostly in the US. There's many other global organizations that do similar things to us. So it's really encouraging. There's an organization similar to ours in Europe. There's one in China and Australia and Mexico and Canada. So demand is there. In the US, we've seen over 180 corporations, mostly, transact in this voluntary space at scale. And so when I talk about participating in the market, I'm really talking about a utility scale investment. So rooftop solar is super important and not as much what we track. We're really tracking those larger scale investments. So over 180 customers who are largely in the corporate space have transacted since 2014, and every year it grows. And every year there's new customers, which is also really important. Last year we saw over half of the new customers were new. They range in all different sectors. They are in the technology really dominates here. They're about 50% of the corporate deals are coming from the technology space. And there's others also in this space. They also have large energy demand, so it makes sense. We also have seen a lot of interesting movement from the automotive space, from industrials and manufacturers. So all this to say is the demand is there, and it's diversifying, and it's growing. So that's, to me, really exciting, because what we as an organization want to see is a 90% decarbonized US grid. And we think corporates can really push the envelope to get there faster. And that's one of the goals of our organization, is to provide the tools, provide the convening, provide the voice for it to happen at a faster pace than it would happen, without that community, without that action. So that speaks a little bit to the demand side. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Perfect. It definitely does, and that convening is one of the main purposes of today as well. That's exactly what we are trying to achieve with these events as well. That convening around sustainability issues. So on the why question, any additional points to make?
I mean,
yes.
I think it's always interesting to go way back before tax credits, right? So, and we're starting to see this in different technologies that now have tax credits that they never had before in the IRA. But when you have non-commercial technologies and what makes them, they're in demand because they're affordable, right? I mean, and there's pressure from investors and expectations and shareholders, right? And so you may not be regulated like an electric utilities were what drove the requirements for procurement of renewables through the 2000s, because the regulators stated in a state level you are required and authorized to spend more on these procurement, right? This demand. And what that did was it drove innovative business models. And so Jigar Shah always gets a lot of recognition in this space, but I think what he brought to the industry in 2004 through Sun Edison, and then what made solar and that PV technology scalable was he applied a business model that was motivating to commercial customers to sign long-term contracts. And as we know today, long-term contracts do not exist. Economies are constantly going up and down. Interest rates are going up and down. Like, trying to predict what you should hedge for is tough. And so he went out during the real estate kind of, as commercial real estate was going through some cycles. And I appreciate Sargon's perspective here, because he shares Texas roots with me too. But the empty warehouses were presented an option. If you sign this long-term lease, which you understand long-term leases because you sell this too, we will rent your roof, and we will help set your power price, right? And it was a no-brainer. It was like, why? I mean, I have nothing on my roof anyways. And so it became the power purchase agreement. Now, if you look at oil and gas and midstream companies, that is how they run their business too. So it was a business model taken from a proven, successful track applied to a new technology at a time when there was demand. And Macy's was doing it. I mean, we were in California was doing it. PG&E was incentivizing customers to change their supply contracts. So it evolved to the procurement of what it is today and what they're buying at utility scale. But utility scale in the late 2000s was still a megawatt, right? And that was, I mean, and just to put it in size, like how would you break down? Because utility scale just from real estate and what a renewable field is.
So we don't track anything under 10 megawatts.
Which is large.
Yeah.
These are Arizona type flatlands. This is, I mean, and so when you look at the rooftops, the complexity and the reason why every rooftop doesn't have solar is the business model, is the cost. And, you know, I say if it made economical sense, McDonald's would have it on every rooftop instead of buying.
Yeah, McDonald's has a virtual power purchase agreement because they can't put it on the rooftops.
Yeah. And then on top of that, then you get the government, right? So DOE, I mean, so this administration is procuring renewable energy, and so it just drives down cost, right? And it also, at the same time, increases the pressures to keep up with your competitors.
Very good. Before maybe taking Nicole's points on the demand side, just to summarize the discussion so far, so we've talked about pressure from external stakeholders as well as potentially internal stakeholders, but also this affordability part as well. And this is one of the things that we discuss extensively in our courses, that actually solar and wind are literally the cheapest forms of building new power plants in the US today. So that affordability angle is probably another important reason on the demand side. So going to Nicole. Nicole, anything to add in terms of the demand side?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective. Obviously, please. I'm coming from the side of the government, but I'm also coming from the perspective of ensuring that everyone has access to the benefits of this clean energy transition, and how, like, we're not just thinking about large corporations and the demands there, but ensuring that people can truly see the benefits of solar, particularly households and communities that have been disproportionately impacted by whether it's their own individual energy burden, meaning they pay a larger percentage of their take-home income to utility bills, so helping drive down those costs, or in a disproportionate impact in just where some of our energy generation sources have been located historically over time. A lot of the lower income and disadvantaged communities across the United States today have been directly impacted by dirty fossil fuel production. And so as we are transitioning into a more clean energy space, we want to make sure that we're including everyone at the table. So sort of the why, and it's funny because we're in a new space. Like I was talking to some folks. I was at a conference earlier this week called RE+. I don't know how many folks in the room know what RE+ is. A few people. So this is the big annual renewable energy conference this year. It was out in Vegas. There was 41,000 people there this year, wow, which is absolutely incredible. Just, a year ago, I think there was 20,000. So it has doubled in size in literally a year. And so that just says a lot to how many more businesses and how much more demand there is in this space.
It started with 300.
I know,
in
right?
03. I was there. Right. I put it on.
Right.
300 in the basement of a hotel room.
It's unbelievable. And so a year ago, we just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is the world's biggest piece of climate legislation. And so what it is doing, and sort of Emily was talking a little bit about tax credits, it supercharged the availability of tax credits, but it also supercharged access to not only government funding and even philanthropic funding, but also private sector funding. And so the business case, the demand, it doesn't make sense to not go to a clean energy transition. Everyone should be taking part of this clean energy transition right now because the funding and the financing are there, And obviously the federal government, we're working feverishly to ensure that a lot of that funding is getting out the doors as fast as we can so we can see impact. And it's everything from like onshoring domestic manufacturing to actual deployment. And so in everything in between. And then just like making sure that we're like kind of getting into the nitty gritty of like, we care about what it does and not just deploy, deploy, deploy. Obviously, it is about deploy, 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 but we want to make sure, and like I talked a little bit about this earlier, that not only do low-income households and disadvantaged communities have access to the benefits, but those benefits include household energy savings. It actually includes community resiliency, so do folks have a place to go in case of an emergency? Obviously, we're seeing a lot more natural disasters happening on a more frequent basis and a more intense basis. And so are we thinking about how we're shoring up local communities for those purposes with energy storage? Are we creating wealth building opportunities for all communities? Do they have the opportunity to own the assets? So do we want people to actually have the ability to own the clean energy assets? And then last but not least, but like really thinking about who is working in the clean energy space, who has an opportunity to have a job and a long-term career, a well-paying career. And that's one thing that all of this legislation is doing, is ensuring that there's prevailing wage attached to deployment, but really also supporting an incredible amount of business getting into this space. And so like I said before, there's 40,000 people at this event this past week, and we're gonna see more and more and more businesses come to the table to really ensure deployment. And the thing is if we don't see more and more businesses come to the table, and we don't see more and more people interested in joining as an installer or an electrician or joining the trades, we won't be able to do this fast enough. And so like my sort of call to everyone is, now is the time. And I've been doing this work for 20 years, or over 20 years, so I'm gonna not date myself too much, but over 20. I am the most hopeful I have been in that time frame. We really are, obviously we are, seeing the impacts of climate change, but we have the sort of framework and the demand across the board and the ability to actually do this transition. So I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation.
Perfect. So right before coming onto the stage in the back room, when we were talking among them ourselves, I said I want to focus on the demand side, supply side, and the policy side. And so far, we have just touched upon the demand side. I want to discuss supply and the government perspective as well. But then we talked about PPAs, VPPAs, we talked about equity considerations. I think this panel could have been the entire day, and we could have talked even more about all these different pieces. But just in the interest of time, let me get your thoughts on the supply side next. My broad question here is, we've talked a bit about the evolution of the technology, the cost coming down, particularly for solar. Seems like there is now a good push for offshore wind. Storage is another big story. We talked about that with Sargon as well when he visited us. So I'm just curious about your overall thoughts on the trends on the supply side of the market next. What are the technologies? We briefly talked about with Emily on the business models, because business model innovation was one of the key drivers of the increase in the adoption, particularly for rooftop solar panels that we've seen. So what are the interesting angles that are exciting you today on the supply side of the market? Maybe I can start with you again, Emily.
Well, and I have to say, I mean, I come at it from a pretty unique perspective, because when I moved up here in '03 and got into the solar business, I was straight off of Vanderbilt, like education, and from Texas, right? And the Bush administration here, I grew up in oil and gas. I love oil and gas. I work with oil and gas people. And I always question what makes them so dirty and you so clean. But I spent a decade in this space. And so when it comes to supply, when you look at the business model as it was stated in the tax credits that were successful in '05, they were built without the rules. So it drove manufacturing abroad. Like, we lobbied for those tax credits because there was BP Solar was making panels up in Frederick, Maryland, right? It was American jobs. It was quality made panels, and this was all based on kind of technology that was also coming from innovations that the U.S. had invested in R&D years ago, right? And whether Exxon held that quiet or not, it was there. So there was a lot of demand for renewables, but it needed to be so cheap. It was made in China. These panels killed U.S. manufacturing. A lot of people lost their business. And then the regulation for the workforce, as well as the environmental impact of how you made supply, it's just regulated differently in different industries. And so we have worked with a lot of oil and gas companies to say, they also went through exponential growth during the shale revolution at the same time when solar was going parallel. And I would go back to Texas and state, I think I chose the wrong industry because I get the eye rolls of subsidy driven and solar only works when the sun is up, right? But the point is that, when I look at production and then what is not accounted for, and I believe there will be inflation, I mean, the prices are already rising, and what, renewables came down so quickly to what you were able to negotiate in these PPAs, that American-made labor standards are and should be better, and it's more expensive, right? And environmental standards should be, taken into account. And so that's catching up at a time that I think is really important with supply, because it should be demanded that is the quality that we have in cleaner production of any of the windmills or the solar panels or the semiconductors and everything that goes into the mining to create all of this. And I mean, we look at it from supply and natural gas, and you say storage, and I argue, well, what makes the lithium battery any cleaner than the natural gas facility? And truly, like, batteries became the plus one. Like, I mean, natural gas missed it, right? Because that was a holy grail. I mean, and so for a lot of the work that we do as far as supply and ensuring that we all still have affordable, reliable power, it's the predicament. So we work on a lot of carbon capture, sequestration, GHG emissions, looking at anything related to how you can continue to supply what you're providing in your business right now, whether it be a molecule or an electron, and then how you reduce your emissions to meet the expectations of the demand.
Right. Obviously, for batteries, it's really important what type of electricity we're using to fill them up, right? If it is renewables, it's a different equation than if we're filling them up with natural gas. So going to Sarah, anything to add on the supply side?
Yeah, I think about, I might augment the supply side to think about the barriers. So we know the demand's there. So what are the barriers to achieving this clear signal for demand, both from the environmental sector, the corporate sector, and beyond? Regulation is driving this in a lot of places as well. So the barriers we see mostly for the corporate sector is a combination of supply constraints, like actual physical supply chain constraints, which are being addressed through a lot of onshoring, the CHIPS Act, and other things to get more modules being made in the U.S., more chips, more semiconductors being made in the U.S. Those are going to relieve some of the tensions in the supply chain, and they can't come quick enough, right, to meet the demand. One of the other barriers we see is to meeting this demand is like old laws around like regulated markets. So we have several states across, well, it's not defined by state boundaries, but there's a large part of the U.S. that still has a regulated market situation where you don't have choice. So as a corporate, if you want to procure renewable energy, you have to go beyond your geographic boundaries or do something like a virtual power purchase agreement. So that's big. So a way to unlock that constraint would be to open those markets to be organized wholesale markets. In the absence of that, we see utilities doing creative things around green tariffs, mostly in those markets, which is a way to offer, some alleviation of the supply. So there's definitely challenges around meeting the demands. Some of them are policy-driven, some of them are just global geopolitics. There has previously been bans on importing modules from certain areas of China that had very important human rights issues that we need to pay attention to. So one thing I wanted to pick up on that you said about this, about the supply side or the demand side, there's a demand also for this transition to be done in the right way. We've had lots of transitions across the US with technology, and we don't get that right very often. And there's a lot of ways that this energy transition could be done too quickly without consideration of also the other elements. And that's something that a lot of corporates are paying attention to, but the supply is not there for those either. So I sound like a negative person right now. This is a huge movement. I think people say we're in the decisive decade for climate. That is very clear, and there's a lot of action, and the IRA could not have done more. Like, this is a fundamental shift in investment, and not calling it a climate bill was really important. Right. So kudos. It's huge, and so there's a lot of momentum behind that. There's still a lot of details that need to be ironed out for it to realize its full potential. But I think you'll see through that a lot of supply will unlock. It's still, we do like a barometer, and 2-3 years ago we would have said this is a supply heavy market. There's a lot of, there's more opportunity as a corporate buyer. You can negotiate, you can take your time, you can look at that term sheet and really have choice. That is not the case. This is very much, the contracts are getting longer, and the risk terms are going more towards the suppliers because they are much more in control. We see the VPPA is tricky. Tax equity is a really interesting thing that looms its head every few years as being popular. Right now, companies can't learn enough about tax equity, and there's not enough supply for them to even be able to use their tax equity to invest in renewables. So supply is challenging.
So I'm going to go back to the audience in a minute, but before I do that, so let me get your comments, Nicole, both on the supply side, but also Sarah's points about the energy transition and the role of the government. I think throughout the discussion we've highlighted, and throughout today as well. I don't know how many times we've mentioned IRA. I think in all of the panels throughout the day, we talked about IRA and how important it is in facilitating the energy transition. Maybe briefly, if you can talk us a little bit about not just the supply side, but also the role of the government and what has been working the most effectively in ensuring the energy transition so far in your experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny you said, like, we could just talk up here for hours, and so I'm going to try to keep it short. But there was 2 things I wanted to add to the supply conversation, and it's really about soft costs and about the administration's Justice 40 initiative. And so one of the things that in the work that I do in the federal government is focus on the soft cost portion of deployment. And so when I say that, like, there's the hard costs and there's the soft costs. So hard costs are obviously investing in the actual technologies and, like, are we driving down the cost of panels and racking and inverters and all of that. And then the soft costs are more workforce, like siting and permitting, like where is this all going to go? How do we navigate the permitting process? Like, how much is that going to cost? And then, like, interconnection into the utility grids. And so without having a focus on those soft costs and really truly, like, addressing the barriers to those different types of things, this transition isn't going to be successful. And so really making sure that like one of the things I talk about is obviously workforce, and workforce is such a huge component of like success. If people aren't building businesses and working in this space, we're not going to be successful. Well, where are we going to put it all? And so if like local governments are not streamlining permitting processes, if utilities aren't working with their state and local governments as well as developers to streamline and the interconnection process into the utility grid, we're not going to be able to deploy as fast as we really want to be able to. And so really making sure that we're paying attention to those soft costs is an important part of the supply chain conversation. And then the other thing is the Justice 40 initiative. So I'd be curious in the room, how many people are aware of Justice 40? There's a handful. Great. So like first week of this administration, there was an executive order made that basically ensured that as part of this clean energy transition, that a minimum of 40% of the benefits of the transition will flow to low-income and disadvantaged communities. So this is a overarching umbrella lens to all of the work that the government is doing in this space right now to ensure that those who have been hit the hardest and, like I said before, disproportionately impacted by their utility bills get to be at the table, and not only at the table, but helping drive decision making. It's like, where is this all going to go? Who gets to see the benefits of? And so, you know, the role of the federal government is to ensure just that. And we're taking a whole bunch of different approaches to do that. And so I'll talk about two different specific pieces, and I can dive into other details later. But I really wanted to call attention to a tax credit adder. This is going to get real wonky real fast, but so there's the ITC and the PTC, which is the tax credits for basically solar and wind deployment, and that's a 30% tax credit for deployment of those technologies. And then there's all these adders. So I mentioned like domestic content adder. So if you're installing solar panels or whatever that's deployed in the States, you get the 10% additional tax credit. If you're ensuring that your workers are, getting paid prevailing wage, that you get, sort of a portion. If you're located in an energy community, meaning are you on a brown field or are you next to a fossil fuel facility, you get an extra tax credit. This the low-income community tax credit is the most complicated of all of the tax credits. But what it does is add potentially up to 20% on top of the base 30% to ensure that low-income households are truly seeing the benefits of clean energy and actually seeing a financial benefit as well. And so the Treasury finally released guidance. When I say finally, they released guidance faster than any other guidance they've ever released in the history of the Treasury Department, and yet we're all still like, finally, because like we're in this space of, I just wish we could move so much faster. And so as people are stacking all these tax credits together, there's a number of very concerted adders in there to make sure that low-income folks and their households and communities are at the forefront of seeing those benefits. And the other big piece of sort of legislation or programmatic programs that I want to talk about that the federal government is doing, and I have the opportunity to work on. So part of the reason why I'm at both DOE and EPA right now is because as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, there was something included called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Anyone know what the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is? A few people. So this is the largest non-tax program that was created under IRA at $27 billion. And it has three objectives. The first one is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The second one is to ensure that both public and private sector capital is flowing into low-income and disadvantaged communities. And the third objective is to ensure that we're leveraging private sector capital to the full extent possible. And so there are 3 competitions out on the street right now. They're due in proposals are due like in 3 weeks. But I do want to sort of just mention them very quickly. The first one is called Solar for All, and these are for states, territories, municipalities, and tribal governments to create programs that address the market barriers to both rooftop and community solar deployment, ensuring that deployment is going into low-income and disadvantaged communities. $7 billion to basically do a 50-state market transformation. And it like gives me goosebumps to say that, because not only is this program designed to deploy low-income solar, it is designed to ensure that all 50 states plus territories across the United States have designed a market where we can deploy solar. And so this opens up the ability for corporates and everyone else to also participate. And so there are a lot of states out there today that, you know, don't really have strong supportive solar markets. And this program is really helping ensure that happens. The other two competitions quickly are financing. And it's really meant to seed sort of priority projects, whether it's electrifying buildings, electrifying the transportation sector, or investing in distributed generation deployment. But this is direct investment across the United States to ensure that projects have the types of financing and financing products that they need to deploy. Those can be all different types of things, from loan guarantees to driving down interest rates, to bridge loans that, you know, nonprofits and governments need if they're taking advantage of the new direct pay option of the tax credit. So it's complicated, but it's fun. And it's really kind of fun to sort of think about how to glue all of this together and really ensure that, you know, these projects, like there's enough support, whether it's through government funding, private sector financing, or tax credits, or even like the role of philanthropy can play in ensuring that everyone's at the table and truly seeing the benefits of clean energy.
So I think this opens up to so many more questions that I have, but the problem is we are almost running out of time, and I would like to give the audience at least the opportunity to maybe have 1 or 2 questions. So if you have any questions, please come closer to the mics. But I am so sorry that we can probably accommodate only 1 or 2 questions. Let me go to the right-hand side first, and then I'll go to the left-hand side for 1 other question, and I think that's going to be it for the panel. Please.
Hi, I'm Marion. I'm a second-year MBA student. Thank you so much for your thoughts, but I would like to touch on the supply aspect of it, so would love to hear your perspectives on the current electric grid and its infrastructure and how that needs to be adjusted to ensure a consistent supply of renewable energy, especially in geographies where there's a lot of variable supply.
So the question is that, I mean, currently what is integrated into, because it's different for every state, every resource. It's, you know, whether, you know, some states are heavy natural gas and others are heavy coal, and offsetting that in the value there. But I mean, I do think that what you really are speaking to is the change.
Right.
And electricity markets are highly regulated, and there's a reason for that. Big corporates may not like that because they actually have small utilities inside big Amazon. And so it is for the benefit of us, and I think getting back to the role of government or rules, to make sure that we're not paying too much for all of this. I don't know if any of you have looked at a utility bill, but I just got mine from Dominion and Washington Gas. And I looked at them, and my Wash gas bill is so much less expensive. It doesn't have the fees. I'm paying for offshore wind from Dominion. I have no idea where it is. You know, my electric bill is starting to go up. But I know that the Public Utility Commission has stated that it can only go up so much, and that Dominion is only going to do so much. So there are rules in place of how fast it can transition.
And I'll just say quickly, so the grid, the U.S. electricity grid is what we call the largest machine in the world. It is so complicated, and there's so many entities engaged. There's there's the generators, there's the transmission, there's the distribution. There's a ton of efficiency opportunities there, and I mean, IRA is trying to solve some of them. Their transmission, interconnection, and permitting delays are 3 barriers I didn't mention, but those are big barriers to getting new capacity added to the grid. And you know, there's a lot of layers of solutions that need to be out there. From, honestly, some of it's at the grassroots level. There's NIMBYism against these projects being in your backyard, both for solar, which really surprises me, as well as for wind, which, you know, that's a more visible thing. But there's a lot of challenges. So, you know, I think you're asking for the answer. I think there's a lot of organizations that are laser focused on the layers of challenges. The transition can't happen without transmission. Somebody I saw just had a great T-shirt about that. There's, you know, there's permitting issues. There's also the economics and right-sizing. Storage is a huge part of this. Even if we filled, you know, an entire nodal, sorry, I won't get technical. Even if we filled an entire area with all the renewables, it's not going to work because of the timing. So there's a lot of like just engineering behind the scenes that also needs to happen. And I do assert that organized market, wholesale markets need to be part of that solution, because the role of an independent system operator is to balance supply and demand and deploy based on, you know, based on economics. And the economics of renewables are very clear.
Very good. Maybe one last comment from Nicole. I'm sorry, we already have another line for questions, but maybe we can take them offline, just in the interest of time. So let me get a closing thought from Nicole on this specific question on infrastructure, because that's also quite associated with the policy angle.
Right. I mean, the only thing that I'll just add around the importance of infrastructure, and that, you know, obviously that is part of this conversation, and we cannot have this conversation without understanding what it means to talk about both transmission and distribution grids, and sort of all of this interactions of like how we ensure folks are being able to interconnect into those different portions of the grid itself. There's an incredible amount of funding through both the bipartisan infrastructure law, and so there's the bill, and then the Inflation Reduction Act that's investing. And I'll just leave it at this one anecdote, because it was a conversation we were having around domestic workforce. And we were talking about a facility that was creating transformers, or manufacturing transformers. And this is a very specific piece of technology that goes onto our distribution grids. And a lot of times when you do an interconnection for a solar facility, the transformers need to be upgraded. And so it's a huge piece of the puzzle. There's a facility in the southeast that manufactures these, and they were struggling with ensuring that they had enough workers on the manufacturing floor to do this, because they had a 2-year wait list for that piece of technology. And so they were trying to ramp up, and the problem was workers. They were paying their supervisors $120,000 a year, and they were still at like minus 30% in terms of like being fully employed. And they just could not recruit more people in their community to come work in. So they ended up bringing in a bunch of folks on visas to do part of like domestic manufacturing workforce. And so a bunch of folks came over to help with this domestic manufacturing. And so like when you start talking about just like the challenges of the deployment and ensuring that we're like making things at home and making sure that people are getting prevailing wage, and making sure that people are, you know, including safety standards in the manufacturing process, and that technology is actually available. There's a challenge like at every turn, every single turn, but there are solutions. And so I feel like it's just hopeful that we're having these types of conversations. There's enough brain power behind all of this on how to come up with really good solutions and answers to all of those challenges and barriers that you were talking about, because they do exist. And it's a matter of just making sure that we have enough brain power, enough people thinking about it, and really building sort of that trust and excitement and momentum that we need in order to be part of this clean energy transition.
That was the recruitment. We could all of
exactly,
you come work with us.
Exactly,
right. Come,
exactly,
join us.
So this is a great crowd in order to help with that energy transition. And I think on that hopeful note, let's, in the interest of time as well, let's stop right here. And please join me once again in thanking our panelists for this great conversation.